saying that the FBI confirmed to her that she was the target of the heavily armed defendant who had threatened on social media to kill Jewish elected officials in the state. She tweeted this: "It is my sincere hope that the federal authorities take this offense just as seriously as my hate crimes and domestic terrorism unit takes plots to murder elected officials." We're going to have much more on this breaking news at the top of the hour. Caitlin?
Also this morning, a new intelligence review has found that it is, quote, very unlikely that a foreign adversary is to blame for that mysterious illness known as Havana syndrome. As you know, hundreds of U.S. diplomats, intel officers, and other government officials have reported strange and sometimes debilitating symptoms. It prompted a government-led investigation. Some of them said that they had symptoms consistent with head trauma, like dizziness or extreme headaches, and in some instances said that it shortened their careers, caused real suffering, or even led to large medical bills. Now, a years-long investigation has determined there is no credible evidence that an adversary developed any kind of weapon that caused those injuries. Instead, there's not really any explanation for these incidents. In the wake of the reports, the administration is stressing that the findings don't call into questions the employees who reported these health issues.
The findings that the intelligence community has spoken to today in no way call into question the experiences, the symptoms that our colleagues and their family members have reported in recent years. For the part of the secretary, he has repeatedly met with individuals who have suffered, who have reported these incidents. He knows that their pain is real. He has heard their stories. He has.
For more on this, I want to bring in CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who has looked extensively at Havana syndrome, and the national security attorney, Mark Zay, who represents dozens of clients who've experienced Havana syndrome. And Mark, given that you have all these clients that have experienced this, that say this is a real thing, what did they make of what they heard from the administration yesterday?
Well, good morning. Thank you to have me on. They feel betrayed, very much betrayed. These are very seasoned intelligence, military, law enforcement, diplomatic community officers. We've been telling the government, multiple agencies, the evidence that goes well beyond what the public knows, and they feel that this has been completely ignored and whitewashed. And this is something we're going to continue to push until we get much deeper into the truth.
And Mark, you've sued to actually get this full report, is that right?
You're correct. We actually sued for this a year ago. This report, it hasn't been an investigation that's been going on for over years or a period of time, because we had been told that it had been finished a year ago, but the CIA challenged how the DNI was going to report on it and sent it back into draft form. So we are waiting for the actual complete report to be released to us through the court proceedings, which we hope to be sometime later this month.
Did any of your clients get a heads up from either the CIA director himself or anyone in the administration on these findings before they became public?
The short answer would be yes. Within hours or the day before, some of the clients who do have relationships with senior officials were notified. And in fact, there were going to be stories in the press. I heard lots of rumors of it for the last couple of weeks. But that held off until these individuals could be spoken to. But there's so many that obviously the government was unable to contact everyone.
Yeah, there's hundreds of them. And Sanjay, you've looked extensively at this. You had this documentary on it that was a really good look. It was the Immaculate Concussion, the truth behind Havana syndrome. And you found these were very real things that people were experiencing.
Yeah, I think there's no question. If you look at it from a medical standpoint, I think everyone agreed, the physicians who examine these patients, obviously the patients themselves, that something happened to them. And it was a very specific thing, a constellation of symptoms that was most consistent with concussion, but there was no blow to the head or something that preceded it. So that's why it was called the Immaculate Concussion. I think sort of, as Mark was saying, when we talked to people that we had interviewed for the documentary, they were very surprised by this report. One of the patients, who's a doctor himself and was a CIA officer, Dr. Paul Andrews, he said, look, I mean, they've still not investigated the original Havana patients thoroughly. And what he said, they keep deflecting doing so. Specifically, He never released any of his medical records, and they've not spoken to me, so I do not know how they reasonably reached any medical opinions. That's what Dr. Andrews said. So I don't know that there was any new intelligence that was gathered. They still haven't spoken to many of the patients. The other thing is, when you read the report, they say, look, this could have been caused by other things, like environmental causes, infectious diseases. That was surprising because obviously that was considered initially. The issue was that if you have an environmental sort of cause, how is it so targeted then to specific people? The National Academy of Medicine looked into this at the time. Dr. David Relman chaired the committee, the investigative committee, and here's what he said.
We considered a number of possibilities, everything from a chemical exposure to an infection to external stimuli like electromagnetic energy. And we said, okay, there is precedent for microwave energy causing sound in the head that others don't hear. And that was one argument that said, maybe let's walk down this path and see if we can fill out a possible story, a plausible story for microwave energy. And that's what we did.
So it wasn't conclusive, to be clear, but they did consider, again, these other possibilities which were raised again as part of this report as almost like new possibilities. So he presented those findings to the State Department, and that was, several years ago.
But what about the idea that there was a weapon, like some kind of energy weapon that was part of this? Because that was the suspicion that a lot of people who felt this had. That's what they wanted to know more about.
Right, and if you read the report, they say, hey, look, there's no evidence that weapons like this can even exist. And I think that part of the report surprised us the most. Jessica Small and I, the producer on this documentary, and I, we dug into this deeply, talking to people who work on these technologies all over the world. James Giordano is a neuroscientist and ethicist who was called by the State Department to investigate this. We talked to him yesterday specifically about, do these weapons exist? Can they exist? And what he said, very interesting, the science and technology capable of developing these devices of this sort is viable, and it is evidence as based on existing U.S. patents, meaning the United States has access to these sorts of technologies. The other countries that he says also have access are China and Russia. But I dug into this a little bit more deeply with him when we were making the documentary. Here's how he framed it.
This was occurring throughout the late 60s, early 70s.
This type of technology has existed for that long?
Yes, sir.
That's kind of remarkable.
What's important to understand there is technology has marched onward. And so the increasing sophistication, quote, capability of the devices has, quote, improved.
The active denial system.
One more recent example of a directed energy weapon was created right here in the United States, as seen in this Defense Department video.
Long-range, non-lethal crowd control, directed energy weapon.
In 2007, the Air Force Research Lab released the active denial system, a weapon designed to project invisible millimeter waves which induce a non-lethal but painful burning sensation. Watch closely as the invisible energy is directed to easily disperse a crowd.
It's kind of amazing to still watch that video. Point being, though, Caitlin, the technologies do exist. I think there's plenty of evidence of it, and they exist even here in the United States.
Yeah, you can see why there's still major questions about this. Sanjay, thank you for explaining to us what it is. Mark, thanks for telling us, how your clients are feeling, how they're doing, and keep us updated if you get access to that report. Thank you both.
Absolutely.
I want to back up a little bit where it was showing the crowd being dispersed right there.
Designed to project invisible millimeter waves which induce
millimeter waves. The reason why that I support this is because a few years ago I was spending a great deal of time up in Humphreys County, and I bumped into this individual that was kind of odd, but he had wind chimes all over his property, and he had some more things on there that basically made me stop to ask him some questions of some signs and stuff that he had on his barn and on his garage in behind the house. But I asked him, I said, why do you have so many wind chimes? You know, the sitting there constantly dinging and pinging and making all kinds of noise. And he said, because we was inundated by moles. I go, moles? I go, I got the same problem out here where I'm at. He goes, well, we tried everything in the world. He said, but whenever we was told that if we put up these wind chimes that produce this energy, sound, that whenever sound, even though it's a pinging sound, ping, pong, whatever, that it produces enough energy whenever it goes down into the ground that the moles can sense it, and it frightens them, and it keeps them out of their yard. So you can't tell me that there's not energy in stuff that's basically invisible. Now I realize this is a different level of intensity other than sound, but it still works the same way. It's the same way as taking a pebble and throwing it into a pond or a rock and seeing the energy from that one rock disperse and go out, and you'll see the waves that will travel and travel and travel. It's the same type of pattern. It's just being used in a different way. If the truth be known, we probably have never yet discovered the types and the forms of, they called it magic back thousands of years ago. But it was a form of energy that the pharaohs especially had modified. And I truly believe because they had tapped into a different domain to be able to use energy or use this substance in an evil demonic way, that was one of the very reasons why that God destroyed the old world, was because of the evilness that was coming from that. You know, whenever we put a lot of study into the hieroglyphs and all the things pertaining to the pyramids and etc. all over the world and all the other stuff, I am 100% convinced that there was a time whenever a society of people had already tapped into something that basically was not supposed to have tapped into, but they did anyway, and they was using it for evil demonic purposes. You know, they went through the line towards this, and this, and this. Well, there was one line that they didn't cover, which was the spiritual line, the supernatural line. I know for a fact that I seen an object in Knoxville, Tennessee, it looked like a mechanical device, but it was cloned. It was almost completely, totally invisible, and it sat there for about a minute or so and never uttered a sound as far as hearing a motor run. In the meantime, while I'm sitting there watching two individuals that looks like human form looking down at me during the time that they're doing a drop-off in Knoxville towards bringing all the military personnel over the mountains because there was a hurricane brewing. Within a matter of hours, my door basically got knocked in, and I was arrested by 2 state troopers, a bomb squad, and a supervisor that took me to the Knoxville precinct that night and started questioning me about things that didn't have nothing to do with the warrant that they supposedly had. I never did see no signature of no rabbi, but they claimed that a rabbi had signed a warrant for my arrest a few years before that in Davidson County in Nashville, Tennessee, because I had dropped off a cassette tape at the front of his door, and he listened to it, and he found it to be offensive. He found that tape to be offensive, even though that was part of the Freedom of Speech Act, towards being able to voice my opinion about how that I had interpreted the Bible, the King James Version Bible. I didn't know that the warrant was there, number one, and number two, whenever they started asking me questions about Oklahoma and what was I doing in Oklahoma and what was my primary purpose of going out to Oklahoma after they basically planted a bomb in the back of my truck and activated it, and I wound up all over their state and national TV out here, that I guess it become an interest to somebody to the point that whenever they knocked my door down and arrested me, they actually had a deeper perspective or a deeper motive in why that they knocked the door down to begin with, because they knew good and well that the warrant in Nashville, Tennessee, that was basically an old warrant, like a 4 or 5 year old warrant of supposedly this rabbi filled out, which who knows, they may have created the warrant themselves, but they was just using that for an excuse to try to henpeck my brain and find out who I was with or what I was with or what was my initial cause, or what motivated me towards going out to Waco, Texas, and interviewing what few remaining Waco members that it was, staying on the grounds for 2 or 3 days, going house to house within a 5-mile radius, knocking on people's doors, asking them their opinions, and then going to Oklahoma. And less than 2 weeks after I was working for an individual there in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that had I think he had 3, maybe 4 different businesses. They basically done what they done to me in and around the memorial site down there, that basically was all uncalled for. It was 100% all uncalled for. I am a curious person. I do investigate things. I was on an investigation adventure or mission towards me going out to Waco, talking to some of the pre-existing members that were still living at the time. I don't even know that if they still are or not, but they wanted to henpeck me, and I immediately clammed up and said, I ain't answering none of your questions about this. I said, I thought I was arrested for a warrant for my arrest over a rabbi towards me dropping off some material. Well, come to find out, the rabbi never did show up. They kept me in jail for about 25 days there in Davidson County, and they had to release me back out into the public, even though the judge that was handling that case at that time was so ticked off that he refused just to tell me that the case had been thrown out, in which legally that's the only thing that a judge can do after it goes before the judge twice and there's nobody to represent the warrant. He told me, he said, well, because of the circumstances, we're going to put this on a shelf, and if you so much as do one other thing in the state of Tennessee and we find out about it, we're going to combine the both together and we're going to make it that much harder on you. I had never had not one problem out of the Davidson County judicial system other than me having problems out of the federal Homeland Security Secret Service agencies in downtown Nashville. So by them doing me that way, by putting this on a shelf and basically putting me on probation, the public defender that was assigned my case to be able to represent me asked me quite plainly, why in the world, what have you done to piss these people off? I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I ain't never seen a judge act that way on anybody's case. And he said, you don't have a file here in Davidson County. He actually went so far as asking me, do you have something personally against this judge? Or does the judge have something personally against you? What have you done to piss this guy off? He asked me. And I said, sir, I have not done nothing. I said, I lived here temporarily for almost a year in 2005 because they run me basically out of Weakley County because they was trying to get me for falsifying files, is what they claimed, basically towards trying to put me in the same category as a homegrown terrorist right here in my own home county, Weakley County, up in Martin, Tennessee, and Tommy Moore, Dresden, Tennessee, the judge. I said, I do not have a clue what they're trying to do. But I guarantee you there were certain people, especially those that was wearing the black robe, that knew exactly what they wanted to do. And now, since then, this has all backfired on them. But yes, whenever it comes to certain technologies, whenever it comes to advancement pertaining to different things that I have witnessed and seen myself, knowing the verification that sound does travel, sound is an energy of itself, sound can actually run off moles that's in your ground, you got to identify that certain things can be used, weaponry, against the enemy. And there's no doubt this is possibly one of them. Matter of fact, they had another thing that the CIA was talking about a few years ago that was making a great deal of people sick. I mean, just absolutely sick. And they knew that it was a form of weaponry that was being used against the CIA at that time. I don't forgot where it was, but I mean, it was a known fact that it was being used.
Which induce a non-lethal but painful burning sensation. Watch closely as the invisible energy is directed to easily disperse a crowd.
It's kind of amazing to still watch that video. Point being, though, Caitlin, the technologies do exist. I think there's plenty of evidence of it, and they exist even here in the United States.
Yeah, you can see why there's still major questions about this. Sanjay, thank you for explaining to us what it is. Mark, thanks for telling us, how your clients are feeling, how they're doing, and keep us updated if you get access to that report. Thank you both.
Absolutely.
All right, up next, the FBI has just informed the Michigan Attorney General that she was actually the target of a plot to kill Jewish elected officials. We'll give you the latest on that plot next.
There's some really, really weird, crazy stuff going on right now. That the only way that I know to explain it is through the Bible. That the Bible says that in the last days Satan will come down in great wrath because it knoweth its time is short. And I used to think that it was just this demonic spirit
That's gripped America.
that was basically infiltrating people's hearts and their minds to the point of looking at it in the sense of a type of exorcy type movie where they was basically trying to pray a demon out of this girl, and she wound up floating, levitating, and she wound up turning her head completely around. All that was strictly Hollywood that you was watching in the movie Exorcist, but evil and the demonic forces is in fact real. And they can come in various forms and in various ways that can be memorizing to the mind in just exactly how powerful that these entities actually are. And to think that we're living in a society today that don't have those same influences or those same entities is only a figment of our imagination in believing that it's not there whenever certain people knows that it is. Now, can you prove it? Can you tangibly bring it out to the point that you can see it? In most cases, no, you cannot. But whenever you have experienced it and you have seen it working either through people or coming down in the form of major horrific forces of nature, or for a fact that people can be bamboozled or bewitched, and whole groups of people doing things abnormally, and I'm just going to throw this out there for an illustration. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ. That the powers at bay was so strong at that time that it basically bewitched a whole group of people. And I don't know if it was 100, I don't know if it was 1,000 that was involved in all that court proceedings and that ceremony towards crucifying Christ. I'm pretty sure it was probably around 1,000. I'm just guessing, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But to think that everybody in that area had made the same assumption that Jesus Christ was evil and that Jesus Christ needed to be crucified, even though Jesus Christ had not done nothing to deem that type of punishment, tells me that yes, those people was susceptible of being subject under these type of influences, that basically they all took the bait. It wasn't just Judas that took the bait. It was all of them in general. And if they didn't take the bait towards being a portrayer like Jesus, or if they didn't take the bait towards being a persecutor like the Roman soldiers, or if they didn't take the bait towards being like the centurions or the Philistines or some of the other people over there, they took the bait in the sense that they stood idly by and did not raise a finger to what was happening. It's under the same type of influences that I come back here in Northwest Tennessee in 2017, and even though certain people didn't directly get involved in wanting to persecute, aggravate, agitate, hunt down, or terrorize my brother and I out here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, or 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Even though they didn't actually roll up their sleeves and get involved, none of them contact the police. And if anything, what they actually done was sit back and was entertained by the excitement that was going on out here. And this includes law enforcement up in Dresden, Tennessee, especially people like Tommy Moore, Tommy Thomas, that's now retired, Mike Wilson, that was a sheriff at the time, Johnson, that now has taken the place of Tommy Thomas, and other law enforcement people in this area that I know for a fact not only don't like me, but they would do anything in the world to crucify me. And they really don't know why they have this hate within their heart towards me, other than the fact that they are convinced that I am I'm like an evil entity that needs to be destroyed, and they have convinced themselves of that. And the whole time, instead of Juby, the individual that's talking to you and behind the camera right now, instead of me being the evil entity, it's actually them. It was them that did not want to do their dearling duties towards protecting their citizens out here, because David and I was victims again and again and again and 1,000 times again. And if you don't believe me, under the Freedom Information Act, all you got to do, if you're the right person, in contacting the Weakley County Sheriff's Department and find out just exactly how many telephone calls was thrown out there to an agency that could have basically cared less about what was going on out here, that literally allowed for my brother to be driven off into a state of an early death. That's what these people going to be held accountable for. Not just the people that was engaged in that directly, but those that was engaged in it indirectly that noted it was going on. Especially those that had access to the badge and either didn't do their jobs properly, or they could have cared less. These people will stand in front of the great white throne judgment one day. And God's going to ask them some very serious questions, and they better have some very serious good answers. And if they don't, the only thing I can say is God have mercy on them, is the only thing I can say, because they know that they're guilty.
Two of the world's most powerful diplomats sat face-to-face earlier on Thursday. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met on the sidelines of the G20 meeting in New Delhi. A US official says Blinken underscored US support for Ukraine during the roughly 10-minute meeting. In prepared remarks earlier, Blinken said the unprovoked invasion had marred the G20 meeting of foreign ministers. He called it an attack on the core principles of the United Nations Charter. CNN's Kylie Atwood joins us from the US State Department in Washington. Kylie, you've been speaking to your sources about what was discussed in that remarkable 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. So this was a meeting on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting in India, as you said. And there were essentially three things that the Secretary of State addressed with the Russian foreign minister. First was urging Russia to come back into compliance with New START. Of course, that's a single lasting arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia that Russia suspended just earlier this year. Second, he urged Russia to release an American who is wrongfully detained in Russia. That's Paul Whelan. And third, as you were saying earlier there, he also reiterated U.S. support for Ukraine. This is the first time that these two men, the top diplomats from the US and Russia, have met face to face and had a conversation since before Russia's invasion into Ukraine. They last met in early 2022. At that time, the Secretary of State warned Lavrov about the consequences that would occur if they did invade Ukraine. Obviously, they went ahead with that. And we do know that they had one conversation, at least, over the course of the last year, not in person, but by telephone. That was this summer when they were discussing negotiations to release Brittany Griner, who was American wrongfully detained in Russia at the time. But it's also significant, Max, that they've actually been in the same place at the same time a number of times over the course of the last year. In Bali for another foreign ministers meeting at the United Nations. They've been in the same room. They haven't had discussions. So the fact that the Secretary of State approached the Russian foreign minister, according to a senior State Department official, is pretty significant because he clearly felt that there were messages that he wanted to portray in person.
Okay, Kylie Atwood, thank you very much indeed for working your sources on that. Ukraine's military says it's still holding its ground in the city of Bakhmut, but admits it's getting increasingly difficult. Ukrainian officials report heavy fighting on the outskirts of the city, and they suggest Russian forces have advanced within the city itself. About 4,500 civilians remain in the city as Russian troops do close in. Ukraine also reports a series of Russian rocket attacks on a multi-story apartment building in the city of Zaporizhia. The attack killed at least 3 people. Emergency crews managed to rescue 9 people, including a pregnant woman. About 5 kilometers from Bakhmut is the town of Chasiv Yar. Many Ukrainians fled there to escape the fierce battles in Bakhmut. However, the military fears if Bakhmut falls, Chasiv Yar will be next. Alex Markart is there.
This is the road on the way to Bakhmut. Cars, military vehicles bombing up and down this road, going to and from the front. You see this armored vehicle right here. The V sign for victory. There are still some people here, not too many, but some of these hardy residents have stayed behind. This is the shop of Sivyush, who is here grilling meat. It's called Shashlik. He actually fled from Bakhmut 2 months ago and has opened up the shop selling basics like bananas, beetroot, and candles. There's another man who we just met whose daughter is still in Bakhmut, one of the thousands of people there who have been asked to evacuate but are still in the city amid this incredible fighting. You can see that they put up wood there to protect those windows. So much destruction in this town. We were just farther in the center of town. It's called Chasiv Yar. This is one town over from Bakhmut, with a large group of people at a bus stop waiting for a water delivery that never came. Every few moments you can hear explosions, the sound of what we believe to be outgoing artillery fire, Ukrainians firing at Russian positions. We spoke with...
I want to stop right there for a second. You see him behind that individual? That's a garbage container right there. You keep in mind that before all this took place, these people had an active commerce going. They had water lines, they had sewer lines, they had garbage disposal, they had this going on, they had that going on, they had factories, they had retail stores. These people had lives. real, everyday 21st century lives. That now these people are having to scramble around like a bunch of rats in caves, living down in dark holes, because you know good and well if you take all that plywood and cover up all your windows, now you're basically living in like a tunnel or a cave, not knowing from day to day whether or not you're going to live or die, having to live off a sparingly type food and water, not knowing when your next meal's gonna arrive, listening to the sound of explosions day and night, night and day, not knowing if the next one was going to wind up on your front door or not. This is not just a one-man war that a lot of your media attentions mediators would like to direct that all the blame should go to Putin. No, all the blame should not go to Putin. All the blame should go to all the oligarchs over in Russia that's like Putin, and then it should bleed down or decipher down into your generals, all the way down to the very people that are in behind their badge, their law order of what that they're doing to innocent men, women, and children over in Ukraine. And to think that the world has sat idly by, other than the United States, towards helping these poor people, these poor souls, to think that the rest of the world has sat back idly by and didn't offer a hand towards giving them proper equipment or proper whatever to defend themselves is absolutely appalling. I tend to wonder whenever I see this on a day-to-day level, which is the worst, the idiots that's doing this or the idiots that's watching these people do this, and which is the sickest, the people that's doing it or the people that's watching them doing it that could stop it. Once more, people that could have some sort of influence in stopping it, that don't stop it, to me, they are an accessory to the crime. It wouldn't be no difference if you seen somebody robbing somebody and you had a telephone in your possession and you could have picked up the telephone and called the authorities, and you sat idly by and just sat there and just let them rob them. Or raping a girl right out in broad daylight on an open street, in a public street. See her get her clothes stripped off and get her teeth almost knocked completely out of her mouth, and now 2 or 3 big old brunny guys done grabbed a hold of her while 2 of them are holding her while the other guy is raping her, and vice versa. And you just going to sit there and watch that without making a telephone call? These are the leading elements of the reason why that I felt so strongly in coming back here that my brother and I talked about, because we knew that we was not protected by the community by and large growing up in this area. The group of people that was in this area, that the vast majority of them had died, has already died now, the elderly people, I don't know if they was raised that way or if they just thought that was the proper way of doing things. But I know for a fact that I seen, at the time, Mae Sweat, she was a Sweat at the time before her husband supposedly killed himself, that a great deal of people are still at question at. But I know for a fact that I seen her pull out a shotgun and shoot over my father's head, in explaining to my father, because my father had been working her son, Gary Sweat, that everybody around here called Fat Boy, been working him for about a week. And after Dad gave him the money, as soon as Gary got in the house, she took all the money away from him. And Gary let Dad know what was going on. So now Dad's done went over to her house. He's done already voiced his opinion about it. And now Miss Sweat, standing out on the porch, done already discharged one shot over his head, and explaining to Bobby, my dad, that the next one will be a hell of a whole lot lower if you don't get off my property right now. That you are not going to tell me how to raise my family, was her words. And I guess in her mind, the way that she was possibly raised, that she thought that it was acceptable or fair or right for her to take her boy's money, even though it was her boy that was working and making the money to begin with. I know that for a fact because I've seen it. Now, Miss Sweat, she's in her 90s, soon to be 100, I guess, will probably deny it because she probably can't remember it. But then there's Trina, Kathy, Robert. Robert's dead. Albert, Jerry, and other members of the family that I know that whenever I say what I say, including Tinker, that they'll be able to relate to what I'm talking about towards it being truthful. For some reason, these people wanted to live under the shadows of dishonesty and brutality. And that's exactly what's happening right now with those poor people over there in Russia. Suddenly, all of a sudden, they have been ushered in with all this unjust due of brutality and evil doings, and now their lives is totally turned upside down and destroyed. And in lots of cases, I know whenever I say this, it sounds cruel, but in lots of cases, those that are struggling and hanging on, going through night after night, not having adequate heat, not having adequate food, not having adequate shelter, not knowing from one day to another, hearing the explosions of whether or not one's going to land on top of their head. In a lot of ways, the people in a situation like this, those that have perished, are better off than those that are living through such misery. And to think that the rest of the world, other than the United States and maybe 2 or 3 others, has sat idly by and watched this just fester for the past year. That's the part that I can't understand. And we claim to be a civilized society. We claim that we are a civilized nation or civilized global society, but yet no, this has went on now for over a year, and somebody ain't already done either attacked the Kremlin or done already brought in black ops towards taking out their main leader, Mr. Putin. That's the reason why I say that in a way it's kind of orchestrated, because you don't see no true resistances against this. That's one of the reasons why that a lot of people feel like the January the 6th that happened at the Capitol building was halfway orchestrated. It was like it was like a play that happened. Whenever you sit there and you watch cops opening up gates and opening up doors and moving stuff out of the way, that way the mobsters can come on in and do whatever that they're going to do. It's orchestrated. It's like a play. Because you did not see that forceful resistance movement that tried to stop those perpetrators that was doing that. That's the reason why I think that there's a whole lot more people involved other than just Donald J. Trump. And this includes all of Homeland Security at the time that was working. This includes a great deal of the senators and congressmen up there. This includes a great deal of people like Nancy Pelosi and others that should be held to the fullest extent of the law, and they should have a tribunal court against what happened. Not just on an individual federal level in persecuting the perpetrators that broke out windows and done this and done that, in which, that should be done too, but there should be a tribunal court under military rule of getting down to the bottom of it towards who knew what, why they done what they done, and why they didn't do what they should have done. Because I continue to say that again and again and again, that it's just as vital of the people that had the power to do something that didn't do it as it is those that done it, that should be held to the fullest extent of the law, regardless whether it's the federal law, state law, or the military law. And I know for a fact, whenever you get to looking at God's law pertaining to the judicial justice of all justices' laws, that will be the grand finale law whenever all these people will stand and give an account for the things that they have either done, that they know better in doing, or the things that they should have done that they did not do. And that goes right back here to Weakley County in me coming back here in 2014, and within a 3-year period of time, they drove my brother off into an early death. These officials, even though they may not be but county officials or state officials, they will be held to the fullest extent of God's divine holy law. And those that sat idly by, that did not raise a finger towards doing the proper thing, towards stopping this type of behavior, towards us basically being ostracized out here. It was a hate crime as far as people being against, not necessarily against Juby, which is the individual talking to you right now, but against the things that Juby supported and the things that Juby believed, which is anti-Semitism. It fits under the guidelines of anti-Semitism because they had no earthly idea what my brother had done already sat down and talked about pertaining to taking a cross and putting it halfway up in the building, representing the broken cross that represents the broken system. They had no idea, but yet no, they wanted to come out here and get into a pissing contest, and they wanted to allow for a maniac to drive by here sometimes 7, 8, 10 times a day, screaming and hollering and falsely accusing us of all kinds of stuff. There are certain people within rocks throwing distance of where I live right now. Of course, you'd have to be a really, really good rock thrower to be able to hit some of them's house. But there are certain people within a 2 to 5 mile radius that I promise you, they think that they've gotten away with this. They hadn't gotten away with shit. There are certain people within a 10 to 15, 20 mile radius that have known about all this, that they think that they've gotten away with this because, oh, we wasn't really directly involved. No, but you knew about it. You knew that it was happening. You didn't raise a finger to it. So now you're just like the rest of the United Nations and the rest of the world, that you could have done something, but you chose not to. So now that makes you an accessory to the crime. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of different trials that's brought up before the courts here in America, I don't know how it is all over the world, but in a lot of cases here in the United States, if it was proven that you was aware of a crime that had been committed, or you was aware of a crime that was fixing to be committed, and you did not pick up the telephone and contact the proper authorities, you can be held just as legally liable for that crime as it would have been if you yourself committed the crime. That's the way that I understand the American law. And to think that this bamboozling going on up there in the White House pertaining to he said, she said, he said, is a bunch of BS. Because people sat idly by and watched that happen, watched it unfold, especially myself, that, like I said, it looked like it was staged. It looked like that it had actually been planned out ahead of time towards how that those cops was going to take those barriers and move them out of the way so that the crowd could come ushering right on into the Capitol building and start busting out windows and bashing people's freaking brains in. What I think occurred is that the officials are the people that actually masterminded this, that basically fumigated this. And even though they may not have fumigated it directly, indirectly, subconsciously, they did, because they didn't do the proper and right thing, that they didn't think that it was going to get that far out of hand. They know that it was going to be a rumble. That was the very thing that Donald Trump was instilling and hoping for. He knew that it was going to be a rumble. Matter of fact, he wanted to be in the middle of the rumble. Just so happened Secret Service wouldn't drive him down there with the beast, so he could be right in the middle of the thick of it. They just didn't think that it was going to get that far out of hand. Whenever it comes to the patronesses of the love of people that has for this country, knowing that they have been taken to the cleaners, knowing that various people should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law to have allowed for our country to go down this deep, long, dark path. They was not only trying to protect their own interest, but they was trying to protect their children's interest and their children's children's interest. So in lots of ways, the people that engaged up into that had either been misled because of being lied to about the election being stolen, or they had so much love and gratitude for their country that they themselves was willing to sacrifice themselves on account of it. And people aren't looking at that way. You know why they're not looking at that way? Because the head demons that perpetrated all this don't want the world to look at this way. They want us to look at it in a darkened type glass or with smoke and mirrors. They want us to look at this in a undecided type way towards what actually occurred, why it occurred, and who should be responsible and liable for it occurring. And like I said, there's no doubt that the people that was breaking out the windows, bashing in heads, climbing up the walls, doing the things that they was doing, they know better. They're not stupid people. They are adults, and they should be held accountable to the law. But by me saying that, I go a bit further in saying that Homeland Security, a lot of the senators, congressmen, some of the media, a great deal of people should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. And if they're not willing to do it with civil law pertaining to the laws of the civilians, then they need to take it a step further toward going to military law. Because I guarantee you there are certain people out there, regardless whether they be judges or MPs or whatever, I guarantee you, once they get a hold of this material that I'm putting out there today pertaining to all this, they'll listen to this and they'll say, you know what? That individual of what he's talking about is absolutely true. Certain people on the high levels of government should be held to the fullest extent of the law. Well, you're not going to get that. Okay, listen to me. It goes back to that thing that I continue to talk about, the movie Survivalist or Survival, when everybody at the end of the week makes a choice towards who they're going to pick to kick off of the island, because they have to get rid of somebody once a week until it thins down to the last two remaining candidates. But it's kind of hard to kick the person off the island whenever the person that you're trying to kick off the island is the very person that developed the game and owns the island to begin with. It's the same way in the law, basically going after themselves and persecuting themselves because they are the law. They're the ones that's initiating the law. And because of it, you're not going to get true justice out of that type of concept. The only way to get true justice out of that concept, that it has to go to an upper level of the law, which is the military law, and let the military law have a tribunal court and deciding who, the what, the when, the why, and the where. And this includes Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and other people that dropped the ball that allowed for January 6th to ever occur to begin with.
To take Bakhmut, that they would have another foothold in this region from which to try to push farther into eastern Ukraine. Alex Marquardt, CNN in Chelsea VR.
The US is condemning recent incendiary remarks by Israel's far-right finance minister, calling the comments repugnant and irresponsible. This after Bezalel Smotrich said the Palestinian town of Hawara, quote, needs to be erased. It's the same West Bank town where two Israelis were fatally shot on Sunday. The State Department is calling on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reject the remarks.
These comments were irresponsible, they were repugnant, they were disgusting, and just as we condemn Palestinian incitement to violence, we condemn these provocative remarks that also amount to incitement to violence.
Last goal is in Jerusalem, with more on that amid rising tensions in the region. I mean, all of this is feeding off each other, isn't it, in terms of that tension?
Yeah, and Max, what's adding to the controversy over Bezalel Smotrich's remark, which I should note that Bezalel Smotrich himself is a settler leader. He has called for annexing the West Bank. It's that after those two Israelis were killed in Huwara, that is where Israeli settlers essentially went on rampages. Actually, the chief, the top general, Israeli general for the West Bank, calling them pogroms. They were setting fire to homes and cars with people inside. One Palestinian man was killed, several others were injured, and the Israeli military essentially saying they weren't prepared for those levels of attack. So to hear somebody, a minister in this government, after those attacks took place, where clearly those settlers were essentially trying to do what he's calling for, erasing this village off the map, that is why it got such a swift reaction from the Americans. Now, Bezalel Smotrich, in a tweet and then a follow-up statement, sort of tried to clarify. I don't know if I would call it a clarification necessarily. He says, "I did not mean to wipe out the village of Hawara, but only to act in a targeted manner against the terrorists and supporters of terrorism within it, and to exact a heavy price from them in order to restore security to the residents of the area." Max, I should note that he was asked specifically on stage, what did he mean when he actually liked a tweet that essentially said the same thing? And he said, "Well, because I think the town of Hawara needs to be erased." So I don't understand how his clarification says, well, I didn't really quite mean that. Now, in terms of the reaction from the Israelis, the former prime minister, now opposition leader Yair Lapid, called it essentially incitement to war crimes. We haven't heard directly from the Israeli prime minister Benjamin Netanyahu specifically condemning these remarks exactly, but there have been calls for the attorney general to open an investigation to Smotrich because a different member of parliament actually had made similar remarks, and they had a police file opened against them for incitement to violence. So now there are calls for this to be done against Bezalel Smotrich. In terms of the internal politics, though, you have to understand that Smotrich's far right-wing party is essentially one of the reasons, if not the reason, that Benjamin Netanyahu is even in power, because Benjamin Netanyahu needs the seats that Smotrich's party holds in order to stay in power. If they somehow have some sort of disagreement, some sort of fight, and Smotrich threatens to leave the government, then the government collapses and Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer in power. Max.
Okay, Hadas, thank you. Relations between Beijing and...
What a mess. What a mess. Man, what a mess.
...could become even more frayed, with the Biden administration approving a potential arms sale to Taiwan. The self-ruled democratic island could get more than $600 million worth of weapons, including missiles for F-16 fighter jets like these ones. Beijing says the deal would undermine China's security interests and peace across the Taiwan Strait. The unexplained sickness known as Havana syndrome is a bit more mystifying. A US intelligence assessment couldn't link it to any of the nation's foreign adversaries. The report comes more than 6 years after several American diplomats in Cuba's capital began complaining of dizziness and extreme headaches. Hundreds of cases amongst US...
That was what I was talking about a while ago, this other thing going on towards making people sick.
Roller coaster. Plates and glassware flew across the cabin after severe turbulence forced a Lufthansa flight heading from Texas to Germany to be diverted to Dulles Airport in Virginia. 7 people were injured. They were treated on board and then taken to hospital. Lufthansa says clear air turbulence can occur without any warning. To Greece now, where rail workers are on a 24-hour strike in protest against this week's horrendous train crash. A security camera captured the moment when the passenger train carrying more than 350 people collided with a freight train on Tuesday. At least 46 people were killed, and dozens more were injured. The Greek Prime Minister says tragic human error was the main cause of the disaster. Let's get more from the scene, though, from Nada Bashir, outside Larissa General Hospital, where many of the injured are being treated. I mean, a lot of people saying it can't just be put down to human error. There is a systemic problem here with an aging railway system.
Absolutely, Max. And in fact, when you just look at local media today, there is a real sense of anger. There is a growing backlash against the government around why more wasn't done to prepare for something like this, why the system is so poorly equipped. And of course, many are saying that this could have been avoidable. Now, we're outside Larissa General Hospital. Many of the injured are here. Local hospital officials tell us that many of those involved
in that deadly collision were young people. And in fact, we were at the crash site a little earlier this morning. We were speaking to some of the volunteers there working to support that recovery effort. Of course, no further survivors are expected to be pulled out from the train wreckage, but they are still recovering bodies there. The first two carriages completely engulfed in flames. The third carriage turned on its side, and they are slowly working their way through that wreckage. But sadly, one of the volunteers...
Now see, whenever people see something like that, those that don't do a lot of traveling, those that don't realize accountability and responsibility issues, they just look at it and say, oh, how sorry those people are. But then there's other people, such as myself and others, that look at the substantial damage in the system itself being broken, because you know what? That same train could have had me on there. That same train could have had you on there. That same train could have had anybody on there that caused those type of injuries. And who knows what the death count's going to be as far as the end results of all that. And it's just horrifying in seeing how that one entity after another entity after another entity is failing the citizens of this great planet. And they talked earlier, right before that, of an airplane that hit turbulence and was driven down to the point that it injured a lot of people. You know, you can call it turbulence if you want to, but people like myself knows that coincidences just don't happen out of nowhere. Yeah, we know wind is real. Okay? And the reason why that we know that wind is real is because we have felt the wind. And we have also seen the consequences of what occurs in the event of wind, regardless whether it's just the force of mighty winds coming down and doing damage, or the winds of a hurricane or a tornado. We know that wind is real. This is where I'm going at with this conversation. Who produced that wind? What supernatural entity caused that wind? And I guarantee you, if it's any form of wind that has the entity of destruction involved in it, it is not the entity of God. It is the entity of an evil, demonic, supernatural force, just as the Bible talks about, that will come down in great wrath because it knows its time is short. That's what I continue to keep hammering in on, and I'm going to continue to keep hammering in on, that the vast majority of the people actually don't understand. They don't quite get it in what's happening. And I myself was blinded at one time whenever I read that scripture about how that Satan was going to come down in great wrath, because I dealt with a maniac throughout my childhood life that my parents and my brothers sat around again and again and again towards explaining to one another how wicked and how evil that it sometimes my father had become whenever he allowed for this evil demonic spirit to take his body over, and him becoming so cruel and so unhinged in his tactics against his own children and against his own family. But then again, we would see another side of my father, kind of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, towards seeing how much that old Bob truly did love his family. And he did. He really did. There was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to my dad. Multiple personalities. But I used to think that whenever it talks about evil coming down in great wrath, that was the only format or way that evil could come down in great wrath. I got news for you. Evil has a free reign right now upon this planet. And it can take pot shots in doing things that sometimes even the good spirits just didn't check it in time towards preventing from it occurring. And the next thing you know, it causes irreversible damage. I know for a fact that it is a spiritual warfare between good versus bad, bad versus good. And I know for a fact that good will exceed over bad. especially if the people that believe that are truly a subservient unto the good. But now, if you're only playing games with God, in which, I can't defy that difference of whether or not you're lukewarm or you're just being tricked or you're just giving in to the temptations of sin. Only God can do that, because only God knows the true heart and the true mind of mankind. But there'll be a dividing line somewhere between whether or not you're just playing games with your relationship with God, or whether or not you're sincere in following after God, and you gave in to that trickery, or you gave in to that entrapment. And God, I trust you, God will be the one that will make that determination, and whether or not it was one way or the other. And it will be God that will either protect you from preventing from that occurring, or it will be God that will basically allow for that to occur. Once more, these are all dividing lines that I'm just like everybody else. I'm in a human form. I have a human mind. I have a human body. I can't make those determinations. Just like I can't judge an individual and tell them that they're going to go to hell. But what I can do is line that person up with the Bible and say, what you're doing according to the Bible, you're going to go to hell for. It's not what you're saying, but how that you're saying it. Same way with lining people up pertaining to the LGBTQ community, that I myself can't judge them people and tell them that what they're involved in is under the pretense of going to hell for. But what I can do is take the King James, and I can point out various scriptures and tell you, according to the scriptures in the King James, you're going to be going to hell, because you can tell a tree by the fruit that it bears. Once more, it's not what I'm saying, but how I'm saying it. And that's where people get mismatched on their words, just like that individual that they was talking about a while ago that said something about eradicating that village. And he backed up, he crawfished, he choked, and he said, well, I wasn't talking about the whole village. I was only talking about certain people in the village. Well, whenever you're a spokesman and you're saying things into the eyes of the general public, you need to be very, very careful and think your words out very cleverly before you ever say them, because I promise you, your words can be misconstrued. And just like the lady was talking about a while ago, that if the Israel government fails, that means that leader over there basically will no longer be in power, because he won't no longer have a government to be in power over. You will be surprised how many sensitive matters that are going on among the 200 nations, 200 countries, or right around 200 countries. You will be surprised at the consequences that's going on right now that's similar to what you just got through witnessing pertaining to what's going on over in Israel or Jerusalem over there with their leader over there. You'll be surprised how many areas that are fighting against the same entities that they're basically fighting against, because you got to go back to the Bible and what the Bible announces, that Satan is the author of confusion and he's out to kill, steal, and destroy. I'm seeing this spiral in a critical direction that from all perspectives could lead into the death and destruction of humanity as well as the whole outer face of the world if we do not awaken and understand from a fundamental spiritual value of just exactly what we're all up against. And this thing has been brewing now for quite some time. So basically, 9/11 was the kickoff party to it, that so many people in America got bamboozled because government officials was in behind the distraction and trying to point their finger at one entity that said that they done it versus another entity that actually done it. So you got to look at the whole truth and not just part of the truth if you're going to make these accurate determinations towards what's actually occurring. The whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God. That was put into our Constitution for a reason, because there's 3 different avenues to look at that in regards towards only telling a part of the truth. If you're only telling a part of the truth and you're not telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth, then that means a portion of that truth is now become a lie. You're not actually telling a whole lie, but you're not actually telling the whole truth. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about right here pertaining to this guy right here. Whenever he gets on national TV and he wants to blame the Western world because the Western world has lied to them and the Western world cheated them, I can see both perspectives. I can see the perspective from the civilians here in America don't know nothing about what he's talking about. Nothing at all what he's talking about. You know why? Because it was the government officials that was doing the lying. It was the government officials that obviously was doing the cheating. But at the same time, I can foresee how that people like Putin says what he says, and the reason being is because not only the political parties over here in the Western world, but also the spiritual parties never did embrace the teachings of the windmill ministries that began all the way back, as far as I'm concerned, into 1983, which was 40 years ago. 40 years ago was whenever I made a telephone call to the White House about the Antichrist. Ever since then, my life has been in constant turmoil. Ever since then, my life has been ridiculed. Ever since then, my life has been judged and condemned. And I have seen how that not only my personal life was victimized, but even my own son's life to a degree was victimized, that he really felt like that he was so out proportionally weighed, that he really didn't have no other alternative other than to be like the rest of the crowd, to say, well, my dad, he's sick. My dad, he's wrong. My dad, he's this way. My dad, he's that way. Well, you know, a lot of people has brought up so many fake accusations about me. I have come to the conclusion that it wasn't so much that people didn't want to believe me, but their motives within themselves was so dead set that they wanted to monster size me, demonize me, dehumanize me, criminalize me to the degree that that's what they wanted to believe about Dennis James Jackson, the individual that's speaking in behind the camera right now. And once a person has made it up in their mind that that's how they're going to feel about that individual, I guarantee you I could stand out in the streets, and I could do somersaults and cartwheels. I could try to perform all types of performances in trying to get that individual or that group of people to think otherwise about me. And after the day was said and done, and the day was long, they're still going to walk away believing what they're going to believe. So I finally reached the level of quit trying to defend myself pertaining to these nonsense allegations or people trying to put me in the category of me being a monster. And I've deciphered it. I've looked into it towards what would actually motivate a person to do that. And it goes beyond the psychiatric community's ability to understand that a great deal of this is being motivated spiritually. Spiritually speaking, that person can be overwhelmed. Spiritually speaking, that person can be influenced. Spiritually speaking, that person can be basically bamboozled to the degree that they're going to believe what they're going to believe. And the same exact thing happened with the Lord Jesus Christ during his crucifixion of the trial. And we have seen it again and again and again pertaining to other trials, in how that people has become bamboozled, basically under this type of bewitching, And the next thing you know, their actions are worse than the actual crime that got committed. And we know this by looking at history back before our laws conformed themselves after World War I, the way that they would take bits and pieces of some of the truth, but then they would add to it or take from it. And the next thing you know, they'd string somebody up over a limb. Over here in America, once more, I can't validate what's going on in all these other countries because I've never lived in all those other countries. But what I can say is that I've studied enough history to know that a lot of people that got condemned to death during the time that they had these backyard attorneys and backyard judges and these back alley and backwoods proceedings, that a lot of people that died should not have never died. Just like we know for a fact up until just recently, whenever they finally come out with DNA to be able to prove rapes and to be able to prove murders, blood stains, DNA proof, etc., that we've known for a fact for, I guess, the past 100 years that our system is not foolproof. And God only knows that the people that's been condemned of a certain particular crime that they never actually committed. This is where you start leaning into unforeseeable consequences or manipulation, because the truth can be manipulated. And it can be manipulated not just by one group, but any group, if you will allow for that dominant spirit to come in and manipulate the truth. Now, this one trial that they're doing right now over that lawyer that supposedly killed his family, I've listened to parts of that. I've listened to some of the testimonies from that. As of right now, I still have not made a final conclusion of that, because I don't know enough of the facts about that. The only thing that I can say about that court proceedings, that it is 10 to 1 greater, or at least it's given the appearances of 10 to 1 more truer in how that it is approaching various subject matters versus the O.J. Simpson trial that was basically nothing more than a circus on live TV. As far as I'm concerned, that was a hands down towards O.J. Simpson should have went to jail for the death of his wife and that other individual that Johnny Cochran kept saying that if the glove does not fit, we must acquit. If the glove does not fit, we must acquit. Well, that's only a certain portion of what he was getting at. But at the same time, we don't even know that that was the actual glove that was found in that car. See, there's all kinds of ways of taking something and spoiling it. Taking something and corrupting it. Taking something and manipulating it. And I think, by and large, most of the country that watched the O.J. Simpson trial, after it was all said and done with, said that it was not a fair call. This trial that's going on now pertaining to the attorney, we're just going to have to wait it out to see if the facts are more substantiating than the manipulation or the unforeseeable facts. Where they come up with this phone, how many steps was taken, when the telephone was called, who was making the call, etc., etc. All that's got to do with high-tech technology that probably 20, 30 years ago, they couldn't even had a trial like this. But then again, 20, 30 years ago, they never would have captured all the indifferences that was going on about the police brutality that we know that has been a concept of the American way way before George Floyd, way before what went on in LA with the Rodney King riots. We know for a fact that you got bad cops that has bad motives, that because they wake up, their wife and them are getting into an argument, maybe the child done something that the parent disapproved of, maybe the guy didn't get the check that he thought that he was going to get or the promotion he was going to get, for whatever reason, you got the human factors involved, and God only knows of how many unjust dues that has happened to people, including myself, where various people wanted to take it out on somebody that didn't have a daggum thing to do with that particular crime or what was happening. And the people up in Land Between the Lakes, those law enforcement officers up there, I could go down probably about 8 or 10 names, in addition to Dwayne Camry, that was the captain at the time, badge number 1414, in addition to Gary Hawkins, that worked for the Forestry Division out of LBL, in addition to his wife. I guess it's still his wife that was working at dispatch at the time for law enforcement. Those same people, along with the Neils, along with the Crosses, along with all the above, will stand in front of God that will give an account for what they either done or what they shouldn't have done, or vice versa, what they should have done that they didn't do. Those same people, including Tommy Moore, Tommy Thomas, Mike Wilson, and all the law enforcement agencies here, beginning with Homeland Security out of Washington, D.C., that I just found out about yesterday, last night, that the state of West Virginia has suffered immensely towards Jolene Nugent and their federal government affairs in Wheeling, West Virginia, that if they was willing to do what they done to me by basically coming up with a corrupt testimony, even though 911 tape was just exactly identical verbatim, per word, of exactly like my testimony or my recording that I had on a mini cassette tape recorder at the time, and yet and all, the 911 dispatcher got up there and told the judge, well, it must have been a mechanical failure, is the reason why it didn't actually document Mr. Jackson's voice towards him making a threat to George H. Walter Bush's life, Bush Sr., towards going to Washington, D.C. and trying to assassinate the president. Lie after lie after lie. And if they done an individual from Tennessee that way in Wheeling, West Virginia, God only knows what they've done to all the rest of their citizens over there. And because of all the coal mines shutting down that Reagan shut down, and because of the injusticeness that the wicked, the powerful, and the demonic has placed upon to their citizens has abandoned their state. And now they're offering those same citizens that if they'll come back, will offer you some incentive money. Once more, my grandmother used to tell us boys, if you make your bed hard, you sleep in it. That's not just only pertaining to West Virginia and the things that I can validate that occurred in my life while I was, in fact, on my way to Washington, D.C., but it wasn't to harm no president. It wasn't even to remotely come close to bringing any type of bloodshed or harm to anybody's life. But it will be the rest of the country that will sleep in their own sick bed, that the elders and those that was in authority that's helped to mastermind, that now the innocent, now the young are now going to have to wallow around in the same damn misery that these people created for us all. It's not just West Virginia. It's all the above. Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma. That's just in my personal life. You want to know how come this thing is throwing up onto itself, regurgitating onto itself? That's why. Because we, the people, have set back and we have allowed for it to happen. Like I said, the people engaged in January the 6th, I can look deeply into their sincerity. And I can actually say that probably 80% of them was just caught up at the wrong place at the wrong time. But yet now I realize that they was adults and they should be held accountable for what they done. But probably 80% of them actually thought that they was doing the proper, loyal, patriot, American thing by going up there and contesting, doing what they was doing because they had been subjected to false, fake information coming from their leader that had been manipulated, that not only their leader had been manipulated, but a great deal of them up there did, including Homeland Security, including Nancy Pelosi, that didn't do her job, that should have done her job more accurately the day before towards bringing in the military, the National Guard, and etc. They knew what was brewing. They knew what had been said online. They knew the disturbances that had been talked about on the internet. They knew that the cavalry should have been there. But the cavalry wasn't there. A matter of fact, if anything, the cavalry was opening up the gates in a lot of cases towards lowering their shields and saying, well, y'all just come on, the more the merrier. The more the merrier. And I'm sure there were some of those cops that was working for the Capitol that day that was literally overwhelmed, that really didn't know what to do because they had never seen a sea of people coming at them in that type of form. And because they was outweighed, because they was outnumbered, because etc., 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 they realized that they didn't have a snowball chance in hell in resisting this type of force. A lot of them probably didn't have no other alternative other than, you know what, let's just open up the guards for them. Let's just open up these things and just hopefully they won't get too far out of hand. But they did. They got way out of hand to the degree that they was causing a great deal of the members to go down into the sacred chambers of security, getting on underground trains. But we also see where the vice president himself was so bewildered about the situation that he himself didn't even trust his own protection squad that was assigned to protect him, because he refused to get into the car called the Beast and be driven off by Secret Service.
To say the Russian President Vladimir Putin extremely angry about this situation. He was supposed to go on a trip earlier today to the south of Russia to meet teachers there. He canceled that trip. He did that trip online, and he called the people behind this neo-Nazis, as he put it. Let's listen into what Vladimir Putin had to say.
They're protecting people from neo-Nazis.
This is the blind leading the blind. This is a good example of what Jesus was talking about pertaining to the right hand, not knowing what the left hand is doing. What you're dealing with here is another subjection of this supernatural entity that is forcing people into believing what they're believing and seeing and interpreting what they're interpreting. This is going to be another clear example of that. Listen.
Terrorists, from those who tortured and killed people in the...
Let's back up. Hold it right there.
This neo-Nazis, as he put it. Let's listen into what Vladimir Putin had to say.
They're protecting people from neo-Nazis and terrorists, from those who tortured and killed people in the Donbass for 8 years, those who killed Daria Dugina in Moscow, those who today committed another terrorist act, another crime. They infiltrated the border territory and opened fire on civilians. They saw it was a civilian car, they saw there were civilians and children sitting there, an ordinary Niva, and opened fire on them.
So when Vladimir Putin is talking about a Niva there and opening fire on civilians, the Russians are saying that one civilian was killed while driving a Lada Niva. That's a small SUV, obviously made by Lada. Said one person was killed. Also that a young boy apparently was wounded as well. Apparently those injuries are not life-threatening, as the Russians put it. But as you said, Julia, the Ukrainians, for their part, are saying they have nothing to do with this. They claim that this is either a false flag operation or that these are Russian separatists who are not part of the Ukrainian armed forces, Julia.
And that's probably true. And what Putin was talking about, a portion of that is probably true. Going all the way back 8 years ago, whenever they was having their disturbances first developing. But you got to look at the big picture, and this is the part that obviously Putin either refuses to look at or don't want to look at, is that if they would have just left them freaking people alone over there, not freaking people, but the good people over in Ukraine alone, if they'd have just left them alone, the 2014 ordeal never would have happened. They was provoked in doing that. In what happened 20 and 14, that led to 100 heavenly, I think they call them the heavenly 100 or something like that, that basically had to sacrifice their lives for, that has put this whole situation to where it is today in the onslaught of millions of people, thousands of people, millions of people that has been displaced and thousands of people that has been slaughtered, including men, women, and children. And you got to look at it from the big picture perspective of the David and Goliath story that most people know about in the Bible, towards Goliath being the big giant versus small little David that had the little rock and the sling that knocked out the big giant. You have to look at it from another perspective, from a whole perspective. And you also got to look at it from the perspective that these oligarchs over there declared that the Western world lied to them and cheated them. First of all, I didn't cheat the Russian government. I didn't lie to the American government. I didn't lie to the American people pertaining to my testimony of the things that I have encountered in regards towards my personal testimony. It's not my fault that various people right here in this community chose to rebel against my words and my testimony. It's not my fault that they didn't do the proper and right thing whenever they was warned in regards towards these events. Now, 30 plus years later, the truth is being revealed. Now, 30 plus years later, the truth is catching up with the lie. And whenever I say the truth, it's not just the truth in a supernatural sense from the church perspective, but the truth about global warming, of the climate deniers, the truth about the American election pertaining to the election deniers. And I realize this is a lot of dots to have to put together. You know, you take this sequence of dots and you put them together, and you put the Russian sequence of dots with the Ukrainians, you put them together, you put what's going on over in Israel, and you put them together, you put the dots that's coming from China over in Japan with North Korea, and you put them together, and you put all these other dots together, going back 30 plus years ago, during the latter part of Ronald Reagan's administration, or even going back 40 years ago, of the first part of Ronald Reagan's administration. But then at the same time, you got to look at certain facts. And one of the facts that I want to bring out to my viewer base right now is the fact that Mr. Prior President Ford that come in during the footprints or the heels of Nixon and Carter before Reagan, that validated in his testimony that the American people, our government, never should have went to war with the Iraqi people over in the Middle East, that it was a war that was unjustifiable pertaining to Saddam Hussein never having any mass destruction of bombs. That was something that was elevated on a personal level that I believe young Bush took in consideration towards Saddam Hussein that had threatened his own father, towards going to plot out an assassination attempt. And because of it, he used the American government, the American military, for his own personal agenda. And because that occurred, that's what helped to stem, motivate, or mastermind that in which what happened on 9/11 that did not come from the Afghanistan people, but come from Saudi Arabia. Because at that time, Saudi Arabia was full-fledged in sponsoring all these other terrorist entities. They had known that they had now become, they had gotten a footing in being able to finance their own affairs because of what Donald Trump talked about pertaining to the oil. And now they was moving up onto their Sharia law Muslim movement. Since 9/11, Saudi Arabia has taken a different stance. They want to look more acceptable in the eyes of the global society, so they have backed off in a great deal of their anti-inflammatory movements. But don't think for a second that they're not still going on under the table. Don't think for a second between the jihad and the Taliban and all those other known terrorist known groups are still not being financed by the oil productive petroleum industries over in that area, because I promise you they are. Just like Mr. Ford said, it was wrong. And because it was wrong, it stemmed off what the American people had to suffer because of 9/11. But even saying that, putting another equation into the pile in regards towards what Donald Trump spoke out and said boldly, that the American people still has not gotten down to the bottom of 9/11. And they haven't. But they will. They will. It may be after I'm dead and gone. It may be after this country turns into shambles. But they will eventually find out who bamboozled them, who was actually in behind 9/11 that attacked them, what motivated the attack. And it will all be stemming back to the Reagan and the Bush administrations and how that they basically lied to the American people, and they did not embark upon to biblical Bible prophecy as they was telling the rest of the superpowers that the world was not going to be destroyed by mankind, but it was going to be destroyed the way that God intended for it to be destroyed. The only problem was they wasn't willing to initiate it. The elderly, the baby boomers, those that was involved in this, did not want to listen to any of the things that the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions was declaring or talking about, and because of it, it was much easier to outcast me, to demonize me or dehumanize me, even at the expense of bringing destruction into the lives of innocent. And whenever I say the lives of innocent, I ain't just talking about David Jeffrey Jackson, my younger brother, but I'm talking about lots of people have been burnt and hurt and destroyed on account of this. And you know what? I was supposed to have died. I was supposed to have been destroyed. That's what they intended for me. And they keep missing their target. They're hitting everything around me. In the meantime, now I've outlived this movement to the degree that now I'm seeing it regurgitate upon itself, and now truth is finally prevailing. And truth will prevail, and God's people will prevail if they're truly God's people. Now, if they're a bunch of hokey-pokey people, lukewarm, saying one thing but doing another thing type people, no, we won't never see a resistance against the resistance. We will never see a resistance movement against the resistance. I'll get it out in a minute. I think there's another word, I can't think of it right now, that maybe I should have used, looking at it from a military terminology, but eventually good and truth always prevails. It always has. It did during the era of Moses. It did during the era of Noah. And it did during other prophets of God that was chosen by God, being a messenger for God to the people. It has always prevailed, and it always will. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is stand idly by and watch, because I promise you, good and the truth always prevails.
Thank you so much for that report. And to Greece now, where rail workers are on a 24-hour strike, protesting what they call inadequate safety measures after a train crash that killed at least 46 people. Rescue crews continue their desperate search for signs of life amid the wreckage. The Greek Prime Minister says human error was to blame for the disaster. And Nada Bashir joins us now. Nada, important point
so
there.
Sad. 46 fatalities so far. Human error.
He lied. He didn't ask that of me. I mean,
all right, we're going to go right here to this trial. Like I was telling you a while ago, I've listened to bits and pieces of it, portions of it. And from what I've heard through testimonies and the way that they have approached certain subject matters, I would put this trial here above and beyond 10-1, that at least the attempts to get down to the bottom of what actually happened is more truthful and honest than the O.J. Simpson trial ever even began to think of. Because whenever it's all said and done with, the vast majority of the people that did witness the O.J. Simpson trial was actually disgusted. They was absolutely 100% disgusted. And of course, whenever we seen what happened later on with O.J. Simpson, towards him being busted with all the whatever he was doing that they got busted for, the vast majority of the people said at that point in time, well, karma finally does come back around, don't it? In other words, he's finally getting what he should have got on the first get up. I can only tell you what I've seen and heard here in America. I can only tell you what I personally have experienced or witnessed in my testimony. I cannot say what other people feels or what other things has occurred in other countries. Please listen.
Sheriff Small's in here to say, I didn't give him permission to put a blue light in his car. They came and challenged whether he had authority from the sheriff or maybe a deputy sheriff to put a blue light in his car. But they didn't contradict anything you said about, I've been asking for this data that would get me out of the circle. And now we know why it took so long to get the stuff from his car. It's because because the FBI wouldn't go to General Motors on this event data. The FBI was up there and they bought a Suburban, they're riding it around and they're reverse engineering all these systems to try to come up with reports. And they come in here and tell you, well, it's not complete, something's inaccurate, but this is what we got. And during the middle of all that, that's when, lo and behold, we get on started. Thankfully we did. So then we roll into Labor Day weekend of 2021, where Alex, long-time drug problem, his financial issues, misconduct were exposed. And that made him an easy target for SLED. And I hate to say this, but the evidence is crystal clear. From that moment, he started fabricating evidence against Alec. That's an awful charge. Don't all lawyers accuse law enforcement of fabricating evidence? And I can tell you, this guy right here was a federal prosecutor, was a state prosecutor, and some of my best friends are in law enforcement. And I don't make that claim lightly. Here, what you have heard is they came up with a report that says Alec's t-shirt had high-velocity blood spatter on it. High-velocity blood spatter. What's that? That means you're within feet of a shooting. And they didn't just say any shooting. It said in their report, it says as a result of Paul's murder. High-velocity blood spatter on a shirt as a result of Paul's murder. That was number one. Well, let's stick with number one. Why do I say that it's fabricated? Well, you heard Agent Zapata said we did hemotrace confirmatory blood tests on that shirt. That means there's two types of tests. There's a presumptive test, which is what they use a product called LCD that makes it turn purple where it might be blood. But it turns purple on other agents as well, including bleach, you heard. You also heard that the shirt came out of the bag wet and it smelled like detergent. Anyway, they spray it, it turns purple in places. So they think, well, that must be blood. Next thing they do at the SLED lab is they do a confirmatory test to see if it's blood. 0 for 74, not blood, not blood. That didn't stop SLED from going out and pursuing with vengeance this report. They didn't give the no blood test result to the guy in Oklahoma, and when it surfaced, they had a problem on their hands, and they were pushing it up until this trial. And you heard the testimony from the stand that they went from Mr. Bloody Shirt leading up to this trial to Mr. Clean during this trial. And they asked him, and they raised issues during the trial with Blanca, where were his clothes? No one's asking about the man's clothes that he had on the Snapchat video back in, at 7 o'clock with his son until November or so, I think is what she said. I mean, the issue of changing clothes, it was late to the dance because when they went to, as you heard, when they went to the County Grand Jury to get an indictment that you're going to be deliberating on, they told that grand jury they had an expert report that said it was high-velocity blood spatter. And I asked Agent Owen, I said, when you went to the grand jury and when your guy gave you the report, how'd you not know, Chief Investigator, how'd you not know that there's this hemotrace test that says it's no blood? Well, I didn't get the email. I say it in somewhat jest, but, can the dog eat his email? I mean, has a lead investigator in the case not get the lab report that says there's no blood on the shirt? Now, ultimately it was produced to us, and we were raising Cain about it and said, how can you say this on one hand and that on the other hand? And here we are with a Mr. Clean theory that he washed off after brutally murdering Maggie and Paul. He takes a hose and washes himself off and gets in a golf cart, butt naked, I guess, and drives to the house. So that's the blood spatter fabrication. The other is this blue raincoat with GSR, and if you remember that testimony, Shelley Smith, who worked for Ms. Libby and Mr. Randolph, had told SLED after September, after Alec problems had been exposed, after she had a conversation with a Allendale police officer following an accident investigation in which she was in an accident, that on the morning, she said in here, as she told you, on Wednesday after Mr. Randolph's funeral, and that turns out to be, I think, June 16th, that Alex shows up at the house at Almeda at like 6:30 in the morning, knocking, trying to get in, and he has a blue tarp. And in this blue tarp, she lets him in, he goes upstairs with this blue tarp. He comes back downstairs, he lays this blue tarp out on Ms. Libby's retirement rocking chair in the living room, and then he leaves. And then she leaves to go to her day job, and when she left, the blue tarp was laying out on Ms. Libby's rocking chair. That was her testimony. And so SLED gets that, gets a search warrant, goes to Almeda, and they seize a blue rain jacket. They seize a blue rain jacket. And when they do, they take that blue rain jacket and they show it to just about every family member. Let me get it right quick. So they can think of, and it's Defendants 87, Doug, if you can pull it up. But they show this blue rain jacket to as many family members as they can get in contact with, and the rain jacket is, and no one recognizes it. No one sees it. No one said Alex ever worn it. No one said Paul's ever worn it. No one said Buster's ever worn it. No one said Maggie's ever worn it. Have not seen this blue rain jacket. Have not seen this blue rain jacket. What more think about this blue rain jacket? When they did the search at Almeda, John Marvin was there. And John Marvin asked him, did you find anything? And they said, well, we found the blue rain jacket back on the property. And he said, well, my dad drives a buggy around, and maybe it fell off the back of his buggy. Clearly, John Martin was understanding that it was back on the property, and then they asked him to come look at the blue rain jacket, and he was told it was found in the closet. And he said, that didn't sound right, and they never clarified it. Now here's a picture, I'm not even going to put it up, but I'm going to, 411 is a picture of this closet, and you can see the blue rain jacket is just sort of folded up and stuffed down here at the bottom right. That's the blue rain jacket. And apparently right before this trial, they showed Shelley Smith this picture and it says, does that look like the blue tarp you saw? She said, well, yeah, sure it looks like it. He never showed her this. And she said, this is Appendix 87, it's on the screen. She'd never seen this. But they did GSR testing on this, and it says, whew, it's hot. A lot of GSR. Manufactured evidence, ladies and gentlemen. And then there's this issue of misrepresenting what are the type ammunition found in the shotguns at the residence at Moselle. Paul was murdered with first shot was a buckshot. To his chest, he was turned this way, went in here, and then out under his arm, and that was buckshot. The second shot was into the head, either depending what expert and what pathologist, it's either this way or this way, but into the head, and that was still a duck shot. I learned that you can't shoot ducks with anything but steel pellets because they don't want lead in the water. So you got to have steel pellets. And then Agent Owen testified, admitted begrudgingly that he had testified to the grand jury that there were 4 weapons found up on the property in the gun room, 12 gauges that were loaded, or I'm not saying 12 gauges, I'm sorry, 4 shotguns that were loaded with buckshot and birdshot. There's 4 other ones. So that matches. Well, guess what? Totally not true. That was totally not true. And he admitted on the stand it was not true. He admitted telling Alec during the interview, and he said, well, I can do trickery. And we're going to see that shortly. But and then I said, are you trying to trick the grand jury? No, I didn't say that. Well, we walked through it, and he did say it. And he didn't remember it, and you'll remember the testimony. And I said, well, I mean, people make mistakes, don't you? Yeah, that was a mistake. And it's okay to make mistakes, right? Yeah. And you can make mistakes about time. Well, that's the most common thing people make mistakes about. It's not all right for Alec Murdaugh, who's in the center of the circle, who's not all right for him to make mistakes about time. It is not all right, according to the same investigator who says it's okay, it happens all the time. But here we go, and then Eureka. They finally get into Paul's phone in April of 2022, and they see Alec. Well, they don't see Alec. They see Cash the dog, and they see Paul's feet walking around, and they hear voices in the background. One of them sounds like Alec. And off they go. They go off and get an indictment from the Colleton County Grand Jury, relying upon high-velocity blood spatter, relying upon 4 guns having the same load, and relying upon a rain jacket that's got GSR on it, and Alex lying about being down at the kennels. Now we know, after we've been here 6 weeks, of those 4 things,
Bixby voice privacy contacts have been updated. To continue, review the updated items on your screen.
I'm so sorry. No, that was turned on. I will turn it on. What we know is
I don't know if anybody noticed it or not, but I want to bring this to your attention. As soon as that guy's phone was going off, watch this guy riding behind him. I'm assuming he's probably some sort of either an attorney or a media, some to do with media or something. Watch what he does.
No, that was turned on. I will turn it on.
Checking his phone, making sure that the same mistake don't happen with him.
Turn it on.
And probably out of that whole crowd, including the judge maybe, done the exact same thing. Providing that the judge had his phone on him. He may have had his phone back to back with the locker or something, but I imagine there was a lot of people that probably done the exact same thing by looking at their phone. Oh, I need to make sure that don't happen to me.
What we know is 3 out of those 4 things that was presented to the Colleton County Grand Jury that you're going to be deliberating on for the indictments that return aren't true. No blood spatter, no GSR rain jacket that's ever been connected to Alex whatsoever, and there's no loaded gun. So we're left with the lie. We are left with the lie. Now, Alex lied about being down at the kennels in Almeda. And why did he lie? And that is certainly a fair question. And that's, and frankly, I probably wouldn't be sitting over there right now. He had not lied. But he did lie. And he told you he lied. And he told you why he lied. He said he lied because mean, I tell you, he lied because that's what addicts do. Addicts lie. He lied because he had a closet full of skeletons, that he didn't want any more scrutiny on him, which is the most ironic thing in the world, because depending on which day of the week, their theory is that he slaughtered his wife and son to distract from an impending financial investigation. But he puts himself in the middle of a murder investigation, and he puts himself in the spotlight of a media firestorm. That's their motive evidence. We'll get to that. But he lied. He lied because of his drug paranoia kicked in, and he was clearly in the throes of addiction. He lied for all those reasons. But what he didn't lie for is because he was covering up the fact that he killed Maggie and Paul. That is not the reason he did it. Doug, will you play the dog kennel video, please? I'm going to play the dog kennel video. Just please listen to the voice. Four minutes later, the state would have you believe that Alec Murdoch up and blew his son's brains out of his head and murders his wife after having that conversation about Bubba having a chicken or a guinea. 4 minutes later, their case wants you to believe that this is a family down at the dog kennels doing what families do. They're checking on a dog, tail, Bubba's out running around, and they're saying, Bubba, got a chicken. Now, why would Alec not want law enforcement to hear that? I mean, there's nothing on that tape. There's nothing on that tape that indicates there's any strife, any conflict, any anger, any planning, anybody being afraid, anybody running, anybody scurrying. Nothing. Maggie, Paul, and Alec down at the kennel. That's it. And their timeline is based on the fact that this automated thing kind of messed me up, but the point I was going to open this up and say, under their theory, if your phone's not moving for some period of time, you're dead right then. You could be run over in the traffic 2 hours later, but if you're not answering a text 2 minutes after you receive it, you're dead at that point. And that's their case. That is their case on time of death. Is phone stop moving, you're dead. You've heard testimony from a lot of witnesses. I would say practically every witness who took the stand, who actually knew Alec and Maggie and Paul and Buster, testified under oath how much Alec adored Maggie. She was his all. Some people describe Paul as Alec's best friend. His relationship with them was awesome. And that was unanimous. Unanimous. I want to just play briefly a clip from Blanca testimony about Alec's relationship with Maggie.
You also, I think in multiple interviews with Sweat and other folks, described, I think the words were, Maggie.
Please continue, Doc.
Isn't that what you told Sweat?
Yes, sir.
What does that mean, Maggie was his all?
He adored her. He loved her. He adored her.
Worshipped her. I mean, just treated her as somebody he adored.